So what's your name and what do you currently work on?
My name is Evan Morikawa, and currently working on building a super extensible email client in React and Flux and Electron.
How long have you been involved with React?
Been working on React now for about 9 or so months. Before was immediately given a very cool demo of a friend who hooked up React to a little Spark core and got some very impressive demos for me and looked like a good fit for the project that we were working on.
What was your talk on today?
The talk was about how React and Flux have really helped us build a system that allows for extensibility. There used to be a time when if you wanted to add something to a web page, you had to do really nasty things, inject stuff everywhere, grab things around. But with React, you can much more easily control where components get rendered. With Flux, we can make it much easier for all these third-party components to get data. So it's really let us make a platform out of what used to just be a static web application.
So generally in the history of computing, extensibility has been a really important thing. How has sort of React been different from, say, prior ways of extending out applications?
Yeah, so before, when building applications, you just kind of assumed that you had control over the whole system. Things were coupled very heavily. But imagine in a world where I might have an unknown number of trusted but third-party components sitting in here. It's really important to make things extremely decoupled. And having everything very well componentized and isolated like React components do, and having this nice system of dispatched actions that everyone can listen to as well, makes it much easier to build these types of applications finally.
In terms of dispatch, like, so the coupling is lessened and you have sort of the contract of the different components participating. Is there a way to, say, limit sort of what components can be used by other components? Because you've decoupled them so much, like you might end up having sort of unintentional coupling in a large system where components were really meant to be isolated from each other, those particular components.
Yeah, so part of actually what we've been able to do in addition to that is wrap third-party components in our own system that if they explode, if they have some sort of error, we can catch those errors, we can isolate them, we can log them, we can kill them if necessary. But yeah, certainly, like also another issue is that sometimes we want a very specific components loaded somewhere on the page. And sometimes I actually don't care if you want to be a button on an email composer. You can register for a type of action you want to do. And sort of we can load anyone who fits that description and then use a lot of the properties of actually like Flexbox and CSS to change the order that things are in and how they're laid out next to each other. So there's a lot of flexibility that comes with that as well.
What do you see in the future of JavaScript and React in the next couple of years?
Was really impressed recently about a lot of the hot reloading stuff you can do with JavaScript with these components, just sort of swap things in and out on the fly, like really, really tight feedback loops for building web apps. Also, of course, the same feedback loop for React Native is really impressive and exciting as well, too. Also, just now sort of I see is everything being compiled to JavaScript, JavaScript becoming this endpoint lingua franca for however you want to build these applications. It's becoming a lot clearer that with React especially, it's much more of a way of building applications beyond the implementation details, which is a nice thing to see, right? Like we happen to render to DOM components, but we've seen people render to Canvas, render to native iOS, render to terminal. But the concept of how to build these apps is the same. The concept of Flux has been guiding the way we've been building apps, and that I think will influence a lot of development beyond just web and mobile applications in the future.
One last question. So in working with React over the last year, have you had any sort of insights that were radically new that you now understand software development from a different perspective?
One of the big mental hurdles is when we started using this Flux pattern. Probably took me a solid month before the very concept of how everything works together made sense. But Flux particularly has been a really revealing insight into how we can keep, as soon as you wire everything up declaratively, as soon as you make everything sort of reactive to each other, then all of these issues with syncing data and views just disappear. The way we have been storing all of our data, I'm no longer worried about keeping view and state in sync with each other. Before this, I was building this huge backbone application. You know, view is this giant exercise left to the reader. You get these awful render functions, some of which got highlighted the talks here. But yeah, like not having to worry about that anymore and thinking about things in terms of state and wiring up relationships with each other was a big shift in the way I was thinking about building apps like this.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.